So, around 2,500 or 600 years ago, Buddha Shakyamuni when he gave teachings, of course there were many different religious traditions at that time. So before Buddhism appeared or spread in India, there were other religious traditions such as Sankhya school and the Vaisheshikas, the Jains, or Jainism. So before turning the wheel of the Dharma, the Buddha has said that he has actually discovered a very profound Dharma, which is like a nectar, and even if he were to teach it to others, no one will understand it. Therefore, he said, I'll remain silent in the forest. And so, what he was referring to by this illusion of the nectar-like teaching is the vast and the profound teaching, which is basically talking about selflessness. So apart from the teaching of the Buddha, all the other religious traditions that were extant in India believed in a self or Atman or a soul theory. So of course they were also beneficial to many people. Millions of people were benefited and are also benefiting today. But when it comes to philosophical inquiry, I mean, we need to actually use critical investigation and analysis. And so when you actually focus merely on faith, you don't need to do this kind of critical analysis. But with regards to the Buddha's teaching of selflessness, which he refers to as having found the nectar-like teaching, or Dharma, is selflessness. And in order to understand it, we need to know that what causes us suffering is our negative emotions, the destructive emotions, and the root of which is clinging to some kind of a true independent existence of things. And so when we see the painting of the Wheel of Life, there is the depiction of the three poisons in the center, and then the depiction of the 12 links, beginning with ignorance and ending with that of the aging and death. And then the suffering within the samsara, represented by this outer circle, is said to come from karma. And so there are the 6 different realms of existence in which we suffer in the samsara. And these 6 different realms of existence are the results of our positive karma, which is represented or symbolized by the white half within that second circle, and then the black half of that circle, the third circle, represents those of the bad karmas leading to the bad migrations. And then in the center of this painting, there are the 3 animals which represent the attachment, anger or hatred, and ignorance. Attachment represented by the rooster, the anger or hatred by that of a snake, and then the pig representing or symbolizing that of the ignorance. So what this whole Wheel of Life, the Bhavan represents is that we suffer because of our karma, and these karmas in turn ensue from our negative emotions, and finally, ultimately, that of the ignorance. And so within ignorance, of course, there are many degrees of subtlety. And so the subtlest one, the ignorance, is that of grasping or clinging at some kind of a independent self. And so that is what this ignorance clings on to, that things and self have some kind of independent existence. But to counter this ignorance, we have to gain insight into the reality of how things are. And this is what the Heart Sutra says when it says the form is empty. I mean, of course, when we see things like form, physical things, and so forth, we have this notion that they have some kind of independent existence, and then we cling on to it. But there is no such existence independent existence in things. And therefore, the Heart Sutra says form is empty. This is a blessing for the tea. So, for example, when we see trees, there is this notion that the tree exists out there independently. But if we actually were to search for the tree itself and its branches, the trunk, and so the leaves and so forth, if we break this down into these parts, I mean, we cannot find the tree as such, but we can still say that these parts, the leaves, the twigs, the branches, and the trunk, and so forth, are part of the tree. But if you are pressed, where is the tree? What is that tree? Then, of course, apart from the color, the trunk, the branches and leaves and so forth, you can't have anything that you can call a tree. And so even scientists do talk about things having no objective existence. So, of course, as opposed to these trees, which are inanimate, we are beings with mind, which means that we have experience. And so, just as the tree cannot be found in its parts when you dissect it, similarly, the mind, which has the experience of pain and pleasure and so forth, cannot be found in any part of it. And so, Buddhism teaches the precise reality of how things are precisely, which means that things do not have any objective, independent existence. And so the more you critically analyze and investigate into the teaching of the Buddha, the more you'll see its truth. And so when the Buddha taught selflessness, the other traditions, followers of other religious traditions and philosophical thought traditions actually found that the Buddha was actually teaching something that is nihilistic. And therefore, because the Buddha was not proving, the Buddha's teaching of selflessness was not proving effective for those teachers of other religious traditions, the Buddha had to, at some point of time in his life, to overcome those believers in independent soul theory, which are those of the other religious traditions. The Buddha was forced to engage in certain miracle contest, and so of course we may not be very precise about the time when it exactly happened, but according to Tibetan calendar, the first month of the year, this miracle contest between the Buddha and other teachers of other traditions at that time happened in this month. And so we call it the month of miracles. And so this was started by this ceremony or commemorating or celebrating the Buddha's victory over the non-Buddhist masters is celebrated since it was put in place or started by Master Tsongkhapa. This is one of this celebration of the first month of the miracle of the Buddha was instituted by Master Tsongkhapa, and this is one of the four great deeds of Master Tsongkhapa. That was a blessing for the sweetened rice, if you have got it. It's difficult today for me. This is far. So this the Manlam, the great prayer festival of the miracle month, was started by Master Tsongkhapa, and every year we celebrate it. So we celebrated in Dharamsala after coming into exile, and then also in the great monastic institutions in South India. Also this is celebrated. And so during this prayer festival instituted by Master Tsongkhapa, there is the tradition of reading the Jataka Tales, the series of life stories of the Buddha in his past lives. So with regard to the spread, the phase of spread of Buddhism in Tibet, there was an earlier phase since the 7th, 8th century, and then there was a decline in Buddhism, and a very great decline in Buddhism in Tibet. And then since the time of Master Rinchen Sangpo, the second phase of dissemination of Buddhism happened, and then Master Atisha Dipankara Srijana came to Tibet, and he also was responsible for this revival of Buddhism in Tibet, and he wrote the text called the Lamp for the Path to Enlightenment, which teaches the systematic path to Buddhism, to Buddhahood. And then from him started that of the Kadam tradition of Buddhism in Tibet. And the Kadam tradition has the three different lineages, and of these, the Kadam recall that scriptural lineage focused on the study of the 6 texts, which are the Jataka Tales, the 34 stories of the former lives of the Buddha, and then also the Udhana Varga, the specific verses. And then there are those of the Bodhisattvacharya Avatara by Master Shantideva, and the Shiksha Samuchaya, the compendium of practice by Shantideva as well. And so these two are also combined. And then there is the Bodhisattva Bhumi and also the Sutra Alamkara. So these make 6 classic texts of the Kadam tradition. And then if you could actually study these texts in conjunction with each other and combining them, you would be able to gain a very the profound teaching as well as the vast teaching of the Buddha. And then there is the Lamrim lineage of the Kadam tradition. And of course, there are many different Lamrim texts written by Master Tsongkhapa and also others, such as the Lamrim text called the Swift Path, and then the Lamrim text called the Blissful Path, or so the celebrating Buddha's miracle victory over the non-Buddhist masters is actually to remind us of his enlightened deeds, and so that we could actually admire and also follow in his footsteps. So to go through even when provoked, the virtuous being accustomed to such conduct are incapable of committing a wicked act. So regarding the 6 texts of the Kadam tradition, I have received the transmissions. So I've received teachings on the 5 texts of the Maitreya, which also includes Abhidhasamaya Alamkara and Sutra Alamkara. And then I received the teachings on the Sutra Alamkara and the from the Master Ringzin Tempa from Kinur. And then I also received the teachings on the other texts from Khenpo-Kunga Wangchuk of Sakya tradition, and also the teaching and transmission on Bodhisattva Charya Avatar, a guide to the Bodhisattva way of life, or the way of Bodhisattvas, from the Kinor master Kundalama Tenzin Gyaltsen. So if you actually study these texts, you will find that they are linked. They could be linked to one another. So to go through the story of the woodpecker, the Buddha when he was a woodpecker. Once the Bodhisattva lived in a forest as a woodpecker, renowned for his beautiful feathers, so brilliant, many-colored, owing to his inherent compassion. So it says that he refused to follow the sinful instincts of his kind and abstained from injuring other living beings. He fed on sweet and savory flowers, fruits, and young shoots, and was content. Manifesting his concern for others, he found occasion to teach the precepts of right living, to help the distressed and to prevent the low-minded from untoward action. And so many lifetimes ago, the Buddha was born. The story tells us that the Buddha was born as a bird. And so the Bodhisattvas could actually assume different forms of life on their own, of their own accord, or intentionally. And then there are cases where the Bodhisattvas also could become, be reborn because of their karma. So regarding Buddhism, of course, there are many religious traditions which have belief in a creator God, but Buddhism is not like that. So those who believe in the creator God see the God as someone, an absolute being, already enlightened, But what Buddhism teaches is that we become someone called a Buddha, fully enlightened being, not in, just right away, but that we go through a process of purification of our negativities and building up our experience of wisdom and so forth. So the Ratnavali by Master Nagarjuna refers to how one could engage in the altruistic practice of bodhicitta, where it says that the Master Nagarjuna even prays for being able to take on the suffering of others and giving one's own joy and happiness to others. So may I always be an object of enjoyment for all sentient beings according to their wish and without interference, as earth and water, fire, wind, herbs and wild forests. May sentient beings be as dear to me as my own life, and may they be dearer to me than myself. May their ill deeds bear fruit upon me and all my virtues bear fruit upon them, as long as and so forth. And so what we need to do, and following the teaching of the Buddha, is to do our best to help others and not harm them. So, to continue, the multitude of animals in that part of the forest thrived, protected by the great being, in whom they had found a spiritual teacher, kinsman, physician, and king. The more they found themselves protected by the greatness of his mercy, the more their virtue increased. And one day, when the great being was flying through the woods, feeling compassion for all beings, he spied a lion with mane disheveled, and which means that the lion was an old one. So when we see old people who are frail and so forth, we could also feel compassion. And dirty with dust, writhing painfully on the ground as if struck by a poisoned arrow. Moved by compassion, the woodpecker drew near and asked, "What has happened, O king of beasts, to distress you so? Have you been too bold fighting elephants?" And so this bird, seeing this old lion, weak, asked these questions. Whether he was actually harmed by someone else or like the hunters. Are your heads cold? So I think it's better for us to cover. So for us monks and nuns, we have this advantage. So no, don't leave it only to me to cover my head with my robe, but the rest of you, the monks and nuns, also could join me. So one time in Darjeeling, there's a very, what do you call it? Hot, not hot. A wind, very strong wind blowing. So I covered my head. So I said, I'm going to cover my head. So Bogor Rinpoche and some other lamas also were happy that they could cover their heads. So if you have monks, monastic robes, you could do this. So if you have hair on your head, it's good. Otherwise, it's a disaster for you. So the bird asked this lion these questions, what happened to him? And so the lion replied, So the bird said, "Please say what grieves you and what can be done. If it is within my power, I'll do anything to benefit my friends. Anything I can do to cure you or bring you ease is yours for the asking." And so the bird, of course, was such a weak or small being without any power like the lion. But still, it asked this lion, "What happened? What can I do?" And so the lion replied, "O virtuous and best of birds, neither disease nor exhaustion has caused this discomfort, nor am I the victim of any hunter. A fragment of bone is sticking in my throat like the point of an arrow, and I'm in agony. I can neither swallow it down nor throw it up. I need help from friends. If you know of any way to assist me, please try it." So the lion's response to the bird's concern was that, of course, he didn't fall from some cliff or someone hurt him, but actually because he fed on some animal, a piece of bone was stuck in his throat. So that was giving him agony, pain. So because of the keenness of the bodhisattva's intellect, he quickly thought of a method to extract the bone. Lifting up a piece of wood, he said, "Open your mouth as wide as you possibly can." Then, placing the stick tightly between the two rows of lion's teeth, the woodpecker hopped to the bottom of the lion's throat. So the bird found a very intelligent way to help this lion. Otherwise, if he had just said that "open your mouth and I'll pick out or take out the bone," the lion, once the bird was in the lion's mouth, it could be devoured by the lion. But the bird used an intelligent method. He seized the fragment of bone by one edge with the tip of his beak, and by gradually working the bone loose, he was able to finally pull it free. As he came out of the lion's mouth with the bone, he kicked away the stick which had held the lion's mouth open. No doctor, however skillful or clever, would have succeeded in this operation. Only the bodhisattva, his keen intellect, developed over the hundreds of lifetimes, had the skill to accomplish it. As soon as the woodpecker had removed the bone and with it the lion's anguish, he felt no less happy than the lion at having relieved the suffering of a fellow creature. Such is the spiritual nature of the virtuous. They feel more happiness at easing another's pain than at gaining their own happiness. They experience the misery and happiness of others as their own. Thus the great being, having relieved the lion's pain, felt great joy. Having received the lion's thanks, the great being took leave of the lion and went his way. Some time later, it happened that the woodpecker, though wandering far and wide, was unable to find any suitable food for many days, and he ached with a hunger. Flying through the air on his wings of exquisite beauty, he saw the same lion feasting on the flesh of a young antelope newly killed. The lion's mouth, mane, and claws were stained with blood, tinged red like a cloud in autumn twilight. Now, thought he, though he was the benefactor of the beast, he could not bring himself to utter one word of request. Modesty kept him silent, but because his need was great, he walked bashfully up and down in front of the lion. The lion, though well aware of the woodpecker, did not invite him to join his meal. A benefit bestowed on the ungrateful, like an offering placed on cold ash, like a seed sown on rock. Such a seed ripens into fruit of ingratitude. Then the bodhisattva thought, surely the lion does not recognize me. Approaching with more confidence, pronouncing the blessings spoken by mendicants, he asked for a share. O Lord of beasts, you who earn your livelihood by means of your prowess, great blessings will come to you in honoring a mendicant, one who provides the means by which you may gather merit and good repute. But the lion's innate cruelty and selfishness left him unacquainted with the behavior of the pious, and so he shrugged off the sweet words of this blessing, fixing a sidelong look at the bodhisattva as if to consume him With the anger blazing from his eyes, he roared, "No more! Is it not enough that you are still alive after entering the mouth of a creature such as I? I can devour anything I please. I know nothing of mercy. Is it to insult me that you bother me again? Or is it that you wish to see the next world? Are you weary of life?" This harsh refusal filled the Bodhisattva with shame. Up into the sky he soared, speaking to the lion in language of wings of the freedom of powers of birds, and went his way. A forest deity, indignant at the lion's treatment of the woodpecker, followed the great being to the clouds to see what the bird himself felt. "O exalted one among the birds, why do you, the lion's benefactor, suffer this injury? You have the power of revenge. What good is it to show patience with such a shameless one? Though he may have great strength, you have the power to blind him in a flash, or to pluck the food from between his very teeth. Why suffer such insolence?" The Bodhisattva, notwithstanding the lion's ill treatment and provocation by the god, replied in a way that showed the extreme goodness of his nature. "Enough of that talk. Such a way is not for me. The virtuous help those in distress out of mercy, not out of desire for gain. They do not care if the other understands this or not. What reason then for anger? Ingratitude can only harm the ingrate. For who would do them a second good turn? As for the benefactor, forbearance unquestionably leads to much renown in this world and infinite merit in the next. Moreover, if a benefit is performed for its own sake, how can it be regretted? If done in hopes of receiving something in return, it is no benefit, but a loan. One may gain a spotless reputation through practice of virtue, but if one desires to retaliate against the ungrateful, one becomes an elephant, like an elephant who, after bathing in the river, covers himself with dust. The one who does not know how to return a kindness will never know the glory inherent in gratitude. But is that reason to destroy one's own happiness? Whoever receives a service from the virtues without returning friendship is simply to be left alone, but gently, without harshness or anger. The deity, rejoicing at such wisdom, exclaimed repeatedly, "Well said, well said. Though you do not have matted hair or wear bark garments, you are a true ascetic. It is not dress that makes a sage. Those who practice virtue are those who have the purest hearts." And after honoring the woodpecker in this way, the deity disappeared on the spot. So this story praises the qualities of the virtues, showing how the virtues, even when provoked and incapable of acting badly, having never learned to do so. This story is also relevant when describing forbearance, to show how one practices forbearance with rarely meet with enmity, rarely encounter reproach, and will be beloved and welcomed by many. So there are different kinds of people with different temperaments. Some are very kind and want to help others whenever they have the opportunity, and others who do not have that kind of disposition. So some people, even at young age, they are very kind towards others, helping others whenever they find the opportunity. And others, there are others who are quite wicked. And so if you have the dispositions of kindness, and you will have be able to have that from life after life. And to go to the beginning of these 34 birth stories of the Buddha, series of birth stories, the chapter 1 is about the tigress. The compassionate Buddha and touches every living being. His perfect love, dispassionate and unlimited, resonates throughout all his former lives. Before he became the Buddha, the Bodhisattva, in a series of lives, too numerous to mention, through his wisdom blessed the world with countless demonstrations of his compassion, shown through giving his words, kind words, helpfulness, and consistency between words and deeds. In one of his lifetimes, the Bodhisattva took birth in a family of Brahmins, which was renowned for purity of conduct and spiritual devotion. And as a result of merit earned in former lives, he found himself showered with wealth, distinction, and fame. As a youth, the depth of his intellect was matched only by his eagerness to learn. He soon mastered the art and science so well that the Brahmins revered him as an authority dependable as the law itself. So regarding the author of this 34 birth stories of the Buddha, Jataka Tales, who is Arya Shura, he was a non-Buddhist, but then he went to Nalanda Monastic Institute to debate with the Nalanda masters. And of course, in order to debate with him, the Nalanda scholars were not up to the standard they felt to argue with him. And so they discussed and decided to invite Master Nagarjuna to debate against this non-Buddhist. And so instead of Nagarjuna, Master Aryadeva was sent to Nagarjuna to debate with Arya Shura. And so in order to test Aryadeva, Master Nagarjuna himself actually sat down in debate with him. And finally, Master Nagarjuna said that I can see that you can defeat this non-Buddhist through logic and reasoning, and so you can go. And therefore, Arya Shura and so Arya Shura was defeated in debate because Aryadeva was able to find lots of discrepancies in his non-Buddhist position. And finally, after defeating Arya Shura, once Arya Shura was defeated, he became a disciple of Aryadeva. And then he studied Buddhist scriptures and became a Buddhist. So he soon mastered the arts and sciences so well that the Brahmins revered him as an authority dependable as the law itself to the Kshatriya warriors. He was as venerable as the king. To those thirsty for knowledge, he seemed a reservoir, very never empty. To ordinary people, he seemed a god. So I was thinking that this is a time when we actually recollect the deeds of the Buddha, Shakyamuni himself. And then regarding the Buddha's qualities, there are praises of him by Master Nagarjuna, such as Dharmadhatu Stova and so forth. And also a hymn to the Transcendent One. And so the collection of hymns by Nagarjuna, I received a transmission from Rinpoche, the master, the former, is it Gandhin Tepa? So I've extracted one text written by Master Nagarjuna from his collection of hymns of praises. So I thought I would just read it because I have received the oral transmission, reading transmission of it. So usually I tell people that the Kanjur and Tenjur literature that we have in Tibetan translation should be used as our textbooks for studying Buddhism. And so as part of this, I thought that I would give the reading transmission of this particular text, which goes in the language of India, Chitta Vajra Sattavam. So in Tibetan language, it is called the praise of the Vajra of Mind, or Vajra Mind, or Mind of Vajra. I don't know. Simgi Dorji. So regarding Master Nagarjuna and his disciple Aryadeva, regarding their writings, Master Nagarjuna has written the fundamental verses of wisdom of the middle way, Mula Madhyamaka Karika, and as a kind of a supplement to this text, the Master Aryadeva wrote the 400 verses, and then as an explanation of Master Nagarjuna's Mula Madhyamaka Karika, in terms of explicating the meaning, there is a text called Entering the Middle Way, Madhyamaka Avatara by Chandrakirti. So these three texts are called the root, the verses, the introduction, and or the entering the middle way, and then the 400 verses. So in religious practices, there are those who do external practices, such as which are taken as part of purification of negativities, such as washing one's body, taking bath in holy water, and so forth. And so Aryadeva mentions that there are those teachings which have to do with external activities, and then there are those teachings which have to do with the mind, internal. So once I met a non-Buddhist practitioner who taught me how to listen to the sound of the Vedas. So he said, I have to keep quiet. And so in that silence, without any kind of preconceptions or thoughts going on in my mind, I just need to focus on the sound of Vedas. I tried it, but I didn't hear any sound of Vedas. So, in such traditions, the teaching or the religion is considered that of a sound of. So the Brahmins do their practice with their body. And then there are those who focus on the sound of the Vedas with their ears. And what Master Buddha Shakyamuni, this line of Shakyas, his teaching is something that needs to be practiced with your mind. So sometimes we pretend we are practitioners by wearing the monk's robes. So we get this idea that once we are in the robes, we are practitioners. So in Arahat Sagalha's writings, he says that the monastics should engage in reading scriptures and cultivating one's mind in meditation, and not just be contented with the monastic robes. So if we focus only on doing some kind of physical practices, such as doing prostrations or going around the temples and so forth, that would tantamount to be just focusing on physical aspect of one's religious practice. And then also, if you only recite mantras and do some kind of a visualization and recite mantras, I mean, that would also tantamount to following the Vedic kind of tradition, trying to listen or hear the sound of the Vedas. So, of course, these practices of the physical practices of doing prostration and so forth, as well as reciting mantras and prayers and so forth, are good. But the main practice is to be done by using one's mind. Of course, we do talk about virtues in terms of the physical virtue, virtue of speech, and virtue of mind. But of these three, the primary one is the virtue of mind that we create. So if your mind is virtuous, then your physical actions as well as verbal actions could also become virtuous. So otherwise, if you just recite some mantras for the benefit of this life alone, or for example, for some kind of a success in this life, and this does not become true religious or spiritual practice. So if your practice is only focused for the benefit of this life alone, that will not become a virtuous or a religious practice as such. But when you motivate yourself to help you in the next lives and higher rebirths and so forth, then they become religious or spiritual practices, Buddhists. And therefore, the primary practice of religion has to do with your mind, not your body or speech. So there is another program around what time? 11? 주지 송사. So this text that I have extracted from the hymns or the collection of praises by Master Nagarjuna shows that the mind is the main primary factor in Buddhist practice. So the text says in the language of India, Chitta Vajra Stavam, and in the language of Tibet, Semgi Doji Teba. So, regarding the writings of Master Nagarjuna, such as he has written texts like Mula Madhyamaka Karika, which has to do with the objective clear light, which is a reference to that of emptiness, whereas the collection of the praises of the Buddha that he wrote, Master Nagarjuna wrote, have to do with the clear light mind. Which is like the text which align with the third turning of the wheel of Dharma, particularly the sutra called Tathagata Garbha Sutra, the essence of the Tathagata. So there is a homage to the youthful Manjushri, the translator's homage, and then so Master Nagarjuna pays homage or bows down to the mind itself, saying that the mind it's the one which eliminates the net of thought processes and conceptions that are in the mind, and therefore overcomes the ignorance of the mind. So because of our ignorance of how things truly exist, we have the negative, destructive emotions, which in turn let us create the karmas, and then we suffer because of these negative karmas. And so the net of mental factors are the ones which cause us to have all kinds of problems. And so the samsara as a whole is rooted in our mind, in other words. So these preconceptions, the net of conceptions and so forth that are within the mind can be overcome only by using the power of our mind and not through recitation of mantras and so forth. And so how do we overcome them is by realizing the true reality, the reality or the truth of the mind itself. And therefore, by the realization of the nature, the true nature of the mind itself, you'll be able to overcome the ignorance or the confusion within ourselves. And therefore, Master Nagarjuna praises the mind itself. He says, I pay homage to the mind itself. And so by seeing the nature, the true nature of mind itself, which is one is able to overcome the confusion within the mind. That is to say, by using the mind itself, one overcomes the net of conceptions or mental factors. So sentient beings have many diverse interests and then we also have all kinds of belief in deities, and within Tibetan tradition we have people with different belief systems, beliefs in different gods, deities, spirits and so forth. And then there are other people in other parts of the world, whether in Africa or Europe and South America and so forth, or America. There are people who believe that sun and moon are also gods, and they pay homage to them. So there are people, indigenous people and so forth, who do have such beliefs. So, of course, before the human beings developed any philosophical systems, there were these kind of beliefs in nature, the power of nature, such as sun giving, because the sun gives warmth and light, and we appreciate it. And of course, when we sit in the sun too long, when it's hot, and then we feel the heat, and we want to avoid that heat. And then also there is belief in the fire as God, and also water. And so of course, we have these gods, Agni, fire god, and Varun for Vayu for water god, and so forth. So the real deity which gives us protection, true protection, is one's own mind. And so the Buddha said, you are your own master. So if you do something good, you'll have the positive consequences. And if you do something bad, you'll have negative consequences. So you cannot pray to the Buddha or request the Buddha for something good to happen to you when you created the bad causes. And so, apart from this precious mind, there is no attainment of deity other than this. And so attaining the mind is enlightenment, it says. So it's referring to bodhicitta, maybe. So when you do your practice of deity yoga and then reciting mantras and so forth on the basis of this altruistic intention of bodhicitta, and that would be really beneficial and powerful. Otherwise, without this altruistic intention, your recitation of mantras and visualization of yourself as deities will not be that effective. And so it says attaining or achievement of the mind is enlightenment, and the mind is, just giving you the literal translation, mind is the five different transmigratory beings. And the characteristics of pain and pleasure there are no pain and pleasure, characteristics of pain and pleasure apart from the mind itself, not the slightest. So by cultivating bodhicitta, in other words, you will attain bodhicitta. So the mind, when it's unruly, undisciplined, leads to the 5 different transmigratory existences, realms of existence. And so if you are able to discipline your mind, then you'll be able to purify your mind. And with that purification, you'll attain enlightenment. And so that is not other than, there's nothing other than the mind. So whether it's with regard to the objects of mind and our perceptions of them, so in other words, the object and subjective mind, they do exist by way of convention, worldly convention. Master Chandrakirti says that if you do the sevenfold, if you apply the sevenfold analysis of the mind and its objects, the perceived and the perceiver, nothing can be found through this sevenfold analysis, but still we can talk about the perceived and the perceiver on the basis of this worldly convention. And so there is the conventional designation, mere conventional designation, or the designated objects. On the basis of that, we can say things do exist. And so there is the dependent origination of things. But when you actually delve into the things or search for their identity, whether it's the external perceived objects or the perceiver, you cannot find anything. Therefore, they are empty of any inherent existence. And therefore, in the Heart Sutra, when it says the 5 aggregates also are empty, we need to understand that the word also is very significant. So our experiences of the diversities of things come from our conceptions, and therefore we have all these net of conceptions or thoughts and so forth. And so the next verse I'm not able to understand well, His Holiness says. So the mind which has abandoned the conceptions and which dedicates that merit with conception, the samsara, the cycle of existence, is merely those of the conceptions, and nirvana is the absence of the conceptions. So what this shows is that when we understand the nature of the mind itself as being empty of any inherent independent existence, we are able to overcome all our conceptions, conceptual thoughts, all this net of the thought processes, the conceptions, and then we do away with them and attain nirvana. And so in order to do away with our negative emotions and so forth, we need to understand that of the logic of dependent origination. Because dependent origination, when you understand what is dependently arisen, what it helps is to overcome the 2 extremes of nihilism and eternalism. And therefore the text says, therefore, with all your efforts, I prostrate to the bodhicitta. And in order to cultivate or meditate this mind of Vajra, or the Vajra mind, so through the familiarization or meditation on this, the mind of Vajra, that is the supreme enlightenment. That is called the supreme enlightenment. So those who are born in with all these realms within the realms of existence, with all kinds of constituent factors, are bound by this body. So the being bound by the body means that as long as we have this gross body and the brain, our nervous system works and the brain works, and we are alive within this body. Once the function of the brain function stops, and then you go through the process of the three visions called the whitish appearance, reddish increase, and blackish near attainment. After that, I mean, all the different conceptual thoughts or conceptual states of mind have stopped within us. And so, when you are able to overcome these three visions, when your all the negativities or negative states of mind will be overcome. And so, because you are in the state of that innate clear light nature of the mind, so as long as the three visions of whitish appearance and so forth are still, within your mind, you have not attained that of the clear light mind. So, through one's meditation, when one is able to see this clear light mind and also realize the empty nature of the mind itself, you'll be able to help yourself out of this samsara. And so, without this mind, or the realms without this mind, enter into happiness or blissful existence or blissful state. And therefore, one should guard one's mind thoroughly. And so, this mind, the clear light mind, the subtlest clear light mind, which has no beginning and end, will lead you to that of Buddhahood. And therefore, the text says, this blissful, excellent mind, from this arises Buddhahood. So when it comes to talking about mind, we need to understand that a mind, just as the external objects, have their own causes, mainly that of the material, the basic ingredient that gives the rise to them, the substantial cause. Likewise, the mind has to have its own substantial cause, without which the mind cannot arise from something else. Otherwise, if you were to say that the mind arises, the mind has beginning and something like that, it has to arise from something which is not the mind. So our sensorial perceptions, of course, arise from that basic state of clear light mind. But once all these sensory perceptions and also the visions of whitish appearance and so forth have stopped, you are remained with that clear light nature of the mind. And so that is what leads us to that of Buddhahood. That is what reaches Buddhahood. So the text concludes by saying, okay, this concludes the praise of the Vajra Mind. Written by Master Nagarjuna. So the Buddha says, do not commit any evil deeds, cultivate a wealth of virtue, and thoroughly subdue your mind. This is the teaching of the Buddha, and therefore what this shows is the importance of making transformation within our mind and not just be carried away by certain external practices with your body and speech. So of course, when you pay attention to your mind and you become aware that certain negative emotion is about to arise within you, then you should actually guard your mind from that. So just as we would be careful to avoid being bitten by some rabid dog, when it's approaching us, we would do our whatever we could to protect ourselves from being bitten by it. Now, when it comes to, of course, making transformation of our mind, within our mind, we need also to understand that it has to be done in a gradual manner. And the purification of mind cannot happen just instantly. Just as it's like you have to understand it like going through the school system, from beginning with the kindergarten, then junior and middle school, higher school, and then the higher institutions of learning. So I was trying to lead the prayer for dedication, but I wasn't able to complete the verses. I didn't remember the rest of the lines, and then the chant master also wasn't able to help me. May this jewel-like bodhicitta, precious bodhicitta, arise in those who does not have it, and may it increase ever more in those who already have it. This is a prayer for the truth of Tibet to prevail. What's it called?